Hey everyone, by now most of you have seen my debunk of Terrence Howard's Joe Rogan episode. As surprising as it was to watch him babble like a lunatic and fumble second grade math, what's even more surprising is how many delusional toddlers continue to infest the comment section, relentlessly defending Terry as a genius. It's profoundly depressing. So where do we go from here? Well, just as so many of you requested that I debunk Terry, you've also requested that I cover a similar fellow named Billy Carson, who also appeared on Rogan's show this past week. Some of you may be tired of me debunking Rogan guests, and admittedly I am too. Don't worry, this isn't the new direction of the channel. But because Joe and Billy talk about Terry several times, and because of my utter disdain for all of the credulous sheep who fall for Terry's gibberish and felt the need to spew vitriol and accusations of racism at me for daring to expose his fraudulence, I'm going to rub it right in their dumb faces by debunking another one of their heroes. So who is this Billy Carson? Much like Terry, he spews ridiculously transparent falsehoods in podcasts and in the crappy books he writes. He just doesn't have the Hollywood resume that Terry does. Instead of starring in movies, he makes YouTube videos that are a mixture of Ancient Aliens-style archaeological revisionist fantasies mixed with success porn, like 10 Steps to Become a Millionaire. It's like Gaia mixed with Andrew Tate, basically an amalgam of everything that gullible people fall for. Despite having no clue what he's talking about in literally any academic subject, he speaks with confidence about any topic he wants, using buzzwords he's memorized but doesn't understand. To appear more credible, he references some certificates from MIT and Harvard, hoping that people will think he got degrees from MIT and Harvard. He didn't. These are just short online courses that anybody can take and mean absolutely nothing. Of course, the people who fall for his bullshit think that everyone at prestigious universities are establishment elites pushing the fake Rockefeller narrative, so applauding these non-existent credentials from these institutions is a stunning example of their own hypocrisy. But apart from pointing out that he doesn't sound as obviously insane as Terry, there's not much else to talk about here. So let's go straight to the interview. We kick things off right around the 2-minute mark with a very telling statement from Joe.
Because these subjects, so many of these subjects, so many people have like an instantaneous reaction.
Yeah.
And that instantaneous reaction is, oh, hogwash.
Yeah.
If this was true, I would already know about it. It would be taught in universities.
Yeah.
It would all be...
Yes, Joe, if any of the things that your charlatan guests said were true, we would know about them. They would be taught in universities. People who work in these fields don't just arbitrarily ignore evidence. The idea that the utmost truths can only come from one unqualified jackass who has never studied any academic subject a day in his life is a pathetic fantasy enacted by lazy, uneducated people. As we go through the podcast, in the off chance that any Billy or Terry fans have the courage to be watching, and I'm not holding my breath, I want you to see how painfully easy it is to disprove everything out of Billy's mouth. Here's Joe setting Billy up to spew some garbage about the Sumerians.
Like, why would they detail this? And how do they have a representation of the solar system with the correct amount of planets and relatively the correct order and size? You know, it's not exact, but it's an artistic version of the real thing. Like, what's the conventional explanations when people tried to dismiss what they knew in ancient Sumer?
Well, the conventional explanation is always going to the term mythology. They throw mythology around, you know, left and right to cover up the fact that they have no clue or idea. So they turn it into mythology so they can kind of say it's all fantasy and fairy tales and this is how they express themselves or how they understood the universe. It's all mythology. It's all fake. But in reality, it's not all fake.
Yes, it is all fake. It is all mythology. That's what religions do. They write myths. All of them. They all borrow each other's myths and tell the same stories over and over again about gods who create things, and floods, and wars. They just change the names. It's what humans do. We look up at the stars and make up stories, especially in the times when we didn't know what stars are. But everyone wants the movie Stargate to be real, so let's hear Billy spin his wheels about Sumerian cuneiform.
So this text literally, you know, some of the letters actually relate to complete ideas. But it's incredible work, and it takes a long time to do. And then you have to let this thing dry, and then it becomes stone. So, you know, if people were supposed to be trying to worry about how they're going to get their next meal, shelter for the night and all these kind of things. Who has time to sit down and write these incredible works of art like the Epic of Gilgamesh, for example?
Where they're going to get shelter for the night? He's talking about Sumerians and pretending they were hunter-gatherers. Sumerians lived in giant cities. Ur, Lagash, Kish, Uruk. These cities had huge palaces and defensive walls. They housed tens of thousands of people. Why the hell would the scribes who were writing cuneiform need to look for a meal or a place to sleep? They're scribes. That is literally their only job. They lived in palaces or temples. This idiot has no clue what Sumer was. Nobody should be listening to this podcast episode even 1 second past this very first moronic statement. And yet we persist.
So I think they really were writing down, and also they were transcribing information that was given to them by these quote-unquote gods with a lowercase g.
Right, they were taking dictation from gods, because Billy says so. That's not at all an extraordinary statement, so it requires no evidence whatsoever. The Epic of Gilgamesh was dictation from gods, a very obvious myth about kings and heroes and adventures, just like any other myth from any other civilization, which holds no transcendent or relevant information about anything, has to be dictation from gods, because reasons.
So when you're reading things like the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh, for people who don't know, is one of the oldest versions of a lot of the stories that you hear in the Bible. Very similar to them. They seem to be... There always seems to be a great flood. There's a few heroes. There's angry gods. There's a bunch of stuff going on.
Joe said something smart. Ancient Mesopotamian myths were recycled to develop Hebrew mythology, something most Christians don't know and don't want to know. But more importantly, he just totally dismantled the dumb thing that Billy said, and neither of them pick up on it.
Like cuneiform. Can you read that? Do you know how to read it?
Yeah, a small amount of it, yeah. Studying it from books that I had bought right off of Amazon. I was able to take stone tablets and decipher them myself. So anyone can go online to the UCLA CDLI online cuneiform digital library and read these stone tablets for themselves. You don't need Zacharias Hitchen. You don't need anyone else.
Yes, Billy pretends he can read Sumerian cuneiform. Of course, he never demonstrates this ability. Just trust him.
Is there controversy as far as, like, are there different versions of the transcription? Like, do some people think it's interpreted differently? Is, like, some debate about that?
Only where it comes to where some of the text is missing.
Billy is admitting that there is no controversy over what the intact tablets say, yet he often pretends to have alternate interpretations about what they say.
Like, when you look at that language, we don't even know what it sounds like, right?
Right, no, and the language popped up out of nowhere.
First, it's important to note that cuneiform is not a language, it's a script. But also, if we have no idea what it sounded like, then how do we know what it sounded like?
Mesilim, Lukal Kishke, Inim Ishtara Natha, Eshkana Pera Kipana Piru.
And then a vertical in the middle. So we can read this, Ku Ra Ash, the name of Cyrus.
Obviously, there is some uncertainty here. All of our information about this pronunciation comes from Akkadian society a few centuries later, but they don't even bother engaging with what we know and just pretend it doesn't exist. Or they just have no idea because they've never taken 10 seconds to check. Then Billy says it popped up out of nowhere. What does that even mean? That it began at some point, like literally everything else in human history?
Just imagine, like, a human being deciding that they were going to write down in these very bizarre, and they all agreed that all these things mean a certain thing. So they had to somehow or another have a Rosetta Stone or something where they're documenting it so that people can learn it and teach it.
Yes, Joe, that's how symbols work. Have you seen Morse code? People made up symbols with dots and dashes, and all agreed on what letters they represented. I fail to see what is so amazing about this, other than that it is very old, and we get to see it, which is very neat, but it doesn't mean it came from gods.
There's a lot of weirdness in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Like, I haven't read it, but is there any references to anything that's similar, like Anunnaki-type characters, the Nephilim, or anything like that in the Dead Sea Scrolls?
They show up everywhere. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Enuma Elish, and the Epic of Atrahasis. Of course, even in the Bible, they're known as the Anak, A-N-A-K. We were grasshoppers in their eyesight, it says in the biblical text.
Okay, we've already established that Hebrew mythology stole from earlier mythology, yet we are supposed to somehow be surprised that the same characters show up, like these giants. and we are also supposed to conclude that it's so impossible that they're just made up, even though there is no physical evidence of any giants anywhere in the archaeological or anthropological record. Also, wizards must be real because Harry Potter books exist. This is the toddler logic they are enacting here. Humans make up stories. It's a thing we do.
So no matter where you go in any culture, you're going to discover that these beings, in some way, shape, or form, engaged mankind, brought knowledge, teaching, building techniques, and just so much more wisdom and information, esoteric wisdom, alchemy. All these things came from these people.
So these giant god people came and gave us alchemy, a pseudoscience, and explained how to stack rocks real high. No skyscrapers, no airplanes, no internet, and no understanding of real science like physics or chemistry or biology. They sound like really crappy gods to me.
The craziest version of this story is that they genetically engineered us out of lower primates and put us here to mine gold.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then established different types of civilizations and taught us how to build things, taught us all these different things. And enough time has passed that we've kind of forgotten. Mm-hmm. Enough time has passed. That's the wackiest version of it, right?
Right.
Yes, that is pretty wacky, Joe, especially because what could that possibly mean? Genetically engineered who and from what? Which lower primates? Sahelanthropus chidensis, Ardipithecus, Australopithecines, any number of Homo species? Where on this flawless gradient of evolution did this profound genetic engineering take place, and why was it needed when these species are also remarkably similar anyway? Did they also engineer Neanderthals and Denisovans? If so, what happened to them? If not, why couldn't they make us any better than other species that were also around? This story only works on people who think that anthropology suggests that a chimpanzee gave birth to a human. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. This fascination with gold is really weird.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why back when it was basically useless? You couldn't make a knife out of it. You couldn't, like, it didn't make sense that this would be so valuable. Just because it's rare, you're barely alive.
Useful properties of gold. It's quite chemically inert, so it doesn't tarnish or rust, and it's non-toxic. It's malleable, so it's great for making coins and jewelry. It has a unique luster that is visually appealing. And yes, because it's rare. Come on, guys.
They were like the construction workers, and Anu and Enki and Enlil, these leader gods, were like, the foremen, the master architects and so forth, right? The boss. So these people were working, but they weren't supposed to be enslaved. They were volunteers. They got tired of doing the work, according to them, for about 250,000 years of labor on Earth, and also, according to them, on Mars. This is in the text. They call it Lamu.
I can't believe we have to talk about this. People working in this capacity for 250,000 years on Earth? Where is the evidence for that? Huge structures on Mars? Where is the evidence for that? And it's in the text where? Which text? What's the precise translation? Lamu? Why is there no reference whatsoever that agrees with this translation? I think you can see where the rest of this episode is going to go.
So they went to meet them in the Epic of Atrahasis. They go to Adam's calendar. They go to that same structure that was discovered where that gold mine is located. I was like, holy crap, there is some link here to gold. Specifically, exactly, I don't know, but I know if you're an advanced civilization, you need gold.
Why? Why does an advanced civilization need gold? We're an advanced civilization. We don't need gold. What a profoundly stupid sentence. He's pretending that highly advanced aliens who have mastered interstellar travel need some random element that can be found all over the universe and need us to mine it for them. It's as dumb as the plot of the movie Independence Day, where aliens need to kill us to take our planet's resources, presumably water and coal. A super cool movie, but like most science fiction, the plot does not stand up to any real scrutiny.
And then Enki says, I have an idea that will stop this war. There's an existing being on this planet. Existing, not something that doesn't exist, existing. We can add our essence to it with a slain god. So they're talking about taking the DNA or genetics from one of themselves and mixing it with the DNA of the hominid that was here. It's not specified whether it was, an ape man or anything, but they don't specify in the tablets. But to create a worker being. And they began to do this genetic modification, probably disconnecting some of our DNA, making genetic modifications to us.
Again, what is the result of this? In that timeline of hominin evolution, what is the huge jump in this smooth spectrum that produces some hyper-advanced human-god hybrid that totally defies evolutionary principles? I'm not seeing it. And the new species worked really hard, but the previous ones didn't? If they were so lazy, how had they been surviving all these millions of years? And it's funny to listen to him pretend to know how genetic modification would work. Let's hear more of that.
To get us to take orders from them, they inserted something called a worship gene, which was just discovered recently, that human beings have a gene inside of them that can be turned on and turned off. It can be turned off in a laboratory setting. It can also be turned off with a magnetic field around your head. And when it's off, you don't want to worship anything outside of yourself. You look inside, and when it's on, you look to get something from the outside. So this is incredible.
Yes, it is incredible that anyone would say the insanely dumb thing you just said. No, there is no worship gene. Complex human behaviors can't be correlated with a single gene. That would mean that a single protein would be responsible for the behavior of worship. No, genes can't be turned arbitrarily on or off in a laboratory setting. Regulation of gene expression is a complex biochemical process that occurs within each individual cell. And to pretend that this could be controlled by an external magnetic field is even dumber. How does a magnetic field coordinate the precise behavior of dozens of enzymes? Just gonna gloss over that one, Bill? And wow, this super simple thing that can be controlled with a magnetic field. Can we demonstrate that today? Why doesn't somebody run into a church at Sunday Mass, blast the magnetic field, and watch everyone run out of the church in disgust? Then turn it off and watch them all run back inside. Wouldn't that be a fun experiment?
Yeah, and what's interesting, I'm glad you said made in the lab. They had talked briefly in that text about fashioning people. In other words, almost like...
How did they say it?
They said the word fashioning, fashioning a being.
What was do you remember the actual quote?
I would have to look it up, the actual quote.
This part is amazing. Billy says that they used the word fashioning. Of course, that's a word in English, not Sumerian cuneiform text. Joe wants to know what the cuneiform said. How did they say it?
How did they say it?
Billy repeats himself. They said the word fashioning.
They said the word fashioning.
But Joe really wants to know, do you remember the actual quote? What was the actual word in the Sumerian cuneiform that you're pretending to know how to read?
What was do you remember the actual quote?
I would have to look it up, the actual quote.
He would have to look it up because he has no clue, has never actually read any cuneiform, and is just making up all this bullshit in his own language. Great work, Bill.
Have you talked to Terrence Howard? Do you know his theory about how planets are created? That it's just things ejecting from the sun over billions and billions of years, and that there's a Goldilocks zone where you can create life.
Right.
And that's where the people are.
Yeah.
And then as this Goldilocks zone gets, you have to be super technologically proficient in order to control your environment to the extent that you no longer require the sun in order to keep you alive. That kind of makes sense if Nibiru's out there past Pluto.
Oh, it makes a lot of sense.
It makes sense
that Terrence Howard, because I just talked to him a couple hours ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, so we were talking about wave conjugations and everything.
Fucked me up for like 3 days. I left this podcast for 3 days. I was like, God damn. First of all, how the fuck is he so smart? Like, how would you ever imagine that a dude who's an actor on a television show or in a movie is that smart? Like freaky smart.
Here we go, to all the hundreds of people in the comments of my Terry video who insisted that Joe didn't buy anything he was saying and was just egging him on to coax out all of his crazy, kindly eat your words. Joe thinks the guy who can't do basic arithmetic is freaky smart. No, Joe, none of that makes sense. Stars pooping out planets does not make sense. At all. And of course, Billy is going to ride the Terry train to Moneytown, so he proudly proclaims that he talks to him on the phone all the time. They were talking about wave conjugations and everything. Wave conjugations and everything. I wonder if either of them were able to figure out what that means in their conversation.
But his theory about the creation of planets, I was like, oh, that makes sense.
Oh, it makes a lot of sense.
We watch stuff fly off the sun all the time. And if this matter over time would coalesce and become a planet.
Yeah, it creates an accretion disk, and everything in space creates accretion disks. So once that
What is that word, accretion disk?
Accretion, yeah,
what does that mean?
Disk. So once you have a certain amount of mass in space, it instantaneously, on its own, wants to create this circular, like the shape of our Milky Way galaxy, wants to start circling and swerving around itself. And then as it does that, it begins to create friction. As that friction increases, the matter begins to collapse in towards each other, all right, based on its own energy, and then it then forms a ball. And that then builds and attracts more mass until it builds into a moon or a planet or whatever.
This is just pathetic. In bringing up accretion disks, Billy is specifically referencing astrophysics that contradicts everything they are talking about. When a solar system forms, it's a cloud of gas and dust collapsing inwards that forms a disk. The bulk of the matter goes to form the star at the center, and material at various distances towards the periphery gathers to form planets. He is literally describing solar system formation as is well understood by astrophysicists and just pretending that it somehow instead supports the idea that stars poop out planets. Joe says we see stuff fly off the sun all the time. How much stuff? How often? What is the composition of the stuff? Where does it go? Do we see it collecting anywhere? These are very obvious questions that any rational person would ask, and then inevitably conclude that no, absolutely not. It is not enough material to form a planet. It does not coalesce in any appreciable way. It is not the same material as what planets are made of. None of it makes any sense in reality. And then they just vaguely reference real science and pretend it substantiates the dumb story they're selling. It's pathetic. Our understanding of system formation is guided by actual scientific principles and actual empirical evidence. Does their star poop hypothesis predict anything? Why are inner planets rocky and outer planets gas giants? Do they think planets slowly moving outwards will magically morph from rocks to gas? What do they think about protoplanetary disks we see in telescopes? Do those match what we know to be true about system formation? And doesn't that invalidate their sun poop idea? People who understand system formation have actual terminology they can use, like a central region, a soot line, a frost line, which demarcate which materials go into planetary formation according to where they can exist in the disk. If the sun pooped out planets, wouldn't they all have wildly different orbits in every direction? Why would they be arranged along a singular plane, the ecliptic, which is very obviously the plane of the accretion disk the sun and the planets originally formed from? Do I really need to continue? Idiots like Billy and Terry and Joe just look for ideas that they think are fun and then blindly stab in the dark with words they don't understand to pretend they're right. Their delusions are 100% antithetical to real science, which relies on actual prediction and actual observation. It's just breathtaking.
What do you do when you encounter flat Earth people?
Oh man, I just try to be quiet. I just tell them, look, it's not my.
I do not understand. I just think it's people committing to an idea.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense.
Well, it's a religion now. They turned it into a religion. One guy.
I'm fascinated by it because
it's interesting.
Because it's the ultimate conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
The ultimate conspiracy theory is that we are all on a set.
He couldn't tell. I said, "Did you graduate from high school?" He said, "No." I said, "I stopped talking." So that's when I realized, don't waste your energy on these people.
Yes, Joe and Billy are mocking flat earthers because they fell for a ridiculous conspiracy. And they're right to do that, of course, except that Joe lacks the ability to use this example to gain any useful insight for himself. Or does he?
Well, there's a lot of dudes, unfortunately, who just get on YouTube and they listen to very charismatic people talk that don't know what they're talking about, which I do all the time. But they do it in a way where they pretend they know something is true that's not true.
Yeah.
And people get sucked into it.
God damn it, Joe. You are describing yourself, and you even formally acknowledge that you're describing yourself with a little nod to camera, and you keep doing it. And you encourage millions of others to keep doing it with you. This is why your show is bad for human civilization.
Yeah, I mean, it's just direct evidence that civilizations don't last when they go kooky.
Yes.
And that things go sideways and there's natural disasters and wars that reshape landscapes. Like, look, it's all there, and it's happening right now.
Yep.
And if we're not aware of it, it'll happen to us, and then we'll be a footnote of history.
Yes, Joe, you really do seem to be startlingly aware of how awful your show is. If you keep poisoning the masses with ridiculous lies, nobody will be able to navigate reality and we will destroy ourselves. So maybe change your platform. or just continue spewing insane stories about pyramids being magical power plants.
The mechanisms that would be involved in turning this giant structure into some sort of a power plant, you hear about it, you go, wait a minute, whoa.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And him and I have very similar theories on how the power generation occurred. And I believe that the Nile, when it used to run up close to the pyramids, and the water would run underneath the pyramid, and that would create something called physiostatic electricity as it ran underneath that magnetized crystal granite. Those ions would pour up into the chamber, move up the grand gallery where there used to be resonating rods, where you can see the slots where the rods used to be. They're removed now, but the slots are still there. Then it would be pushed into the king's chamber where it would be amplified and some type of fusion would take place, then forced up through the apex, and then the crystal granite obelisks around the region would capture that ambient wireless electricity. And then if you had something called a JED, which looks like a Tesla coil, you can capture that energy and you can transfer it into a device for gold electroplating, for any other electrical tools you need, like some of the tools they had to have used to create some of these incredible works of art. We can see the tool marks, so we know they had the tools. But they had wireless electricity way back then.
That's insane. If that's true, that's insane.
It is insane, and it's not true, Joe. Let's list the ways we know it's not true. Number one, the Nile never ran under the pyramids. Why the shit would they try to build pyramids on top of a river? The Nile is several miles away from the pyramids, nor is there any evidence that water ever ran under the pyramids, nor can pyramids magically float on water. Second, physiostatic electricity is not a thing. Google it. Nothing shows up, so it's not a thing. He might be trying to say piezoelectricity and fumbling it, but he has no idea what that word means either, since it has nothing to do with what he's saying, rather having to do with mechanical stress like squeezing or pressing, not running water. Then he says ions pour up into the chamber. Which ions? From the granite? What kind of granite? What kind of ions? How are they moving upwards through the lattice and why? What are resonating rods? Can you see slots really? Where? Even if they were there, you see a hole in some rock and you conclude that there was a magic electricity rod in there because why? What is being amplified? The ions? What does that mean? Some kind of fusion would take place? How? That requires temperatures found in the interior of the sun. You're just going to pretend fusion is happening, which is physically impossible at ambient temperature, and not even bother explaining how? And the products of fusion are electricity now? Folks, this is gibberish of the highest magnitude. He is taking random buzzwords from physics, spewing them rapid fire to sound intelligent, and saying absolutely nothing. Anyone who can't see that is beyond helping. Ancient civilizations did not have wireless electricity. You might as well believe in the tooth fairy. End of story.
Because you would think there would be some kind of physical evidence of a device, like something left over, some sort of a, ancient chainsaw, like something.
Very good, Joe. That's absolutely true. You would think that there would be literally any evidence whatsoever for this idiotic, baseless claim, and there isn't any at all, so we can safely dismiss it without a moment's thought, right?
They did a great job cleaning up. I mean, they poured sand over Giza to bury another couple hundred pyramids there at Giza.
Yes, they hid all the evidence for no reason at all, and the evidence in question is just more pyramids, which definitely don't exist and would just be piles of rocks anyway, which are not evidence of any electricity magic whatsoever. The grift is strong with this one.
So the idea is that there were beings that were having wars on this planet. Were they? Do you believe they were having wars with people that were revolting, or were they having wars with other beings?
They were fighting with each other. And evidence of these wars can be found in the book of Deuteronomy in the modern-day Bible. These gods, and I do mean gods with an S, because everywhere in the Bible where it says God singular, it's actually a mistranslation. The actual, if you backwards look up the translation in Arabic and then down to Aramaic and everything else, you find out it's gods plural. They were fighting each other over resources and people and control of the planet.
Yes, the proof that a religious myth is real is another religious myth. Nothing wrong with that logic. He's also inventing out of thin air the notion that there is a mistranslation. He does not speak any of these languages, and he is incapable of translating anything written in those languages, much less correcting any translations produced by scholars.
And you see these wars in the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, the Bible, the Sumerian tablets. And these wars are just nonstop. The Indian Vedas.
Yeah, lots of ancient stories are about wars, because wars are a thing that happened all the time, absolutely everywhere. It's like making up any ridiculous story you want and pretending it must have happened because at one point in the story somebody eats a sandwich, and sandwiches are real, so the story must be real. Next, they jump to conspiracy theories about finding alien structures on the far side of the moon with absolutely zero evidence.
Yeah, top right, B. Okay, you see that where his hand is? Now move to the left going down. Slowly. See that? See that? Go back up again. See that? Oh, where his hand is over right now?
Mm-hmm.
It looks like obfuscation. Sometimes you can take these images and put them into a Photoshop and take away the contrast, and all of a sudden structures pop right out. But right above that, you see those shadows of those pyramid structures?
Right above that.
Yeah, you see those pyramids? You can see this dark shadow.
I see two lines.
Okay.
I see the arrow that's pointing to that one straight line, and then I see what looks like two superimposed arrows.
Okay, do you see?
Yeah, those things.
Okay, yeah.
Those are superimposed, right? Like
no, those are shadows.
But look, those are the same things that are in the bottom. Aren't
Right.
they just pointing at something? Aren't those pointers?
I think they may be highlighting something.
Right,
there.
I think it's a cursor mark or something.
Billy says, look at these pyramid shadows. Joe says those are just cursors that have been superimposed to draw attention to a feature. Billy says no, they're shadows from pyramids. Joe points out the image below with the contrast inverted and correctly asserts that they are cursors superimposed to highlight a feature in the image. So Billy is a moron. This should be the end of the interview. Joe just watched Billy confidently assert something profoundly stupid. Joe himself debunked it in real time, and Billy just slinked away realizing how dumb he just looked. But Joe soldiers on, giving him endless passes, not putting it together that everything he says is just as dumb and baseless as what he just said.
I don't believe we're even from Earth, to be quite honest with you. Our cycadic rhythm doesn't even match Earth's rotation on its axis. We're slightly off. It's actually better tuned to Mars' orbit on its rotation on its own axis than
What do you mean?
Earth.
How's that work?
The circadic rhythm of a human body, the wake and sleep cycle, is actually more tuned to Mars' rotation on its own axis, a Mars day versus an Earth day.
How does anyone not just burst out laughing when Billy talks? First of all, what the hell is a sarcodic rhythm? He's clearly looking for circadian rhythm, which is the physical, mental, and behavioral changes an organism experiences over a 24-hour cycle, which is a day on Earth. Just like countless other animals on this planet, we are awake during the day and sleep at night. This has absolutely nothing to do with Mars. And much more importantly, by inventing this idiotic, baseless answer to a question nobody is asking, he creates enormous, unsolvable problems. We are from another planet, yet we are so remarkably nearly identical to all the life on this planet. We are eukaryotic organisms sharing all the same organelles, all the same enzymes, all the same metabolic pathways, the same organ systems, similar behaviors, with thousands of species from another planet by sheer coincidence. Only a complete moron with zero understanding of biology could say something so unbelievably stupid.
Which is pretty weird that we aren't synced to our own planet after all these thousands,
Is
maybe
that the
hundreds
same
of
as our
thousands of years.
circadian
rhythm, right?
Joe just humiliated Billy again by knowing the term that Billy was looking for but failed to pronounce correctly. Joe admits all the time that he knows nothing about science, so the conclusion Joe should make in that moment is that Billy has no clue what he's talking about. So why doesn't he do that?
How do they calculate it's more tuned to Mars? Like, how does that work?
Well, it's just they geneticists and scientists discovered that our perfect wake and sleep cycle is more tuned to Mars' rotation on its axis, which is about 23 and something minute hours, and versus Earth being 24 hours.
Joe presses again, looking for an explanation. Billy just repeats himself, offering no new information whatsoever, and he also invents a new unit of time, minute hours. The Martian day is 23 and something minute hours, you guys. He is literally repeating the same baseless claim a third time. He just said geneticists figured out that in front of it.
And so they said, wow, this is incredible. And the more they tested it and the more they studied it, they realized we're more tuned to the Mars than we are to Earth, which is pretty strange.
Well, we are weird. We accept shit like leap year.
Right.
Like, what kind of whack calendar do you have where
He just make up stuff.
if some years the month is longer? What the fuck are you doing? Like,
I know.
Make
For what?
a better calendar. Isn't there a better calendar?
Yeah.
So Joe gives Billy a pass on the bullshit he just spewed, and then demonstrates for everyone that he has no clue what a leap year is. Astounding. Earth's orbit takes roughly 365 days to traverse. If we pretended it was exactly 365, our calendar would slowly become out of sync with the seasons. Every fourth year, we have to add a day to put Earth in the same position in its orbit at the new year. I'm confident that virtually everybody watching this video knew this. Children know this. Joe and Billy don't know this, and Billy pretends to have specialized knowledge in this and half a dozen other fields. This is all you need to know about this clown.
Our Milky Way galaxy is pretty interesting because it's absorbing another galaxy at this exact moment called the Sagittarius Dwarf Galaxy. Not the Sagittarius constellation, that's something totally different. We are absorbing the Sagittarius Dwarf Galaxy at this exact moment. People thought for all these decades, looking, or even hundreds of years, looking up in the night sky, seeing that swath of stars going across, oh, that's the Milky Way. Guess what? We've been wrong the whole time. This is now being taught in universities in astrophysics.
No, when you look at the Milky Way, it's the Milky Way. The dwarf galaxy he's talking about is a dwarf galaxy. It has about 320,000 stars. The Milky Way has several 100 billion stars. Those are two very different numbers, and Billy is an idiot. This is a dwarf galaxy orbiting very close to the Milky Way, which is leeching stars away from it, as it will continue to do for the next 100 million years or so until it's fully incorporated.
So what you're looking at the absorption or the merging of the Sagittarius with the Milky Way galaxy. And the exact point where it merges and drops into the Milky Way is right where our solar system is located.
Right. All the stars being leached from this dwarf galaxy are being absorbed right at the precise position of our own solar system, a thing that is physically impossible and also observably false since we do not see other stars flying through our solar system. How does this moron say these things with a straight face?
So this is pretty interesting. We're talking about the fact that our solar system itself is an implant into the Milky Way, that we come from Sagittarius. We're not even part of the Milky Way galaxy.
Right, our star is from another galaxy, yet it is magically orbiting the center of the Milky Way just like all the other stars around it, because he says so. Another baseless answer to a question nobody is asking.
We have Mars, which used to be a moon, a habitable moon of Tiamat, a planet that was 4 to 6 times larger than Earth. And it slung into this crazy orbit. That's why Mars has this weird orbit, and you have to rendezvous with it if you're NASA or anybody trying to rendezvous with Mars every 2 years when it's in apogee or perigee. You have to, with apogee or perigee, one of them is further away than the other. One is 80 million miles, and the other one's closer. So
no, Mars does not have a crazy orbit. Both of these orbits are nearly circular, with an eccentricity of less than 0.1. There are specific launch windows for Mars because sometimes the two planets are on the opposite sides of the sun, very far away from each other, so we wait until they're close. Yet again, he is pulling something completely out of his ass with absolutely zero evidence and asserting it over the entirety of astronomical knowledge and basic logic. If Mars used to orbit something else, how could it possibly suddenly, magically adopt a nearly circular orbit around the sun? That it has a nearly circular orbit around the sun, just like the other planets, is proof that these planets developed from the accretion disk around the sun as it formed. This is absolutely obvious to anyone who understands basic physics. If you are going to suggest some outlandish, extraordinary alternate situation, you need extraordinary evidence, not literally zero evidence, while pointing to ancient stories that you're distorting and don't support your claims whatsoever.
And then they looked at it and said, wow, they meaning astrophysicists, this looks like this Mars wasn't originally in this type of orbit. It must have been orbiting something else in our solar system, which it was.
No, zero astrophysicists say that. He's lying. Joe could ask to fact check that claim, and he doesn't do it.
Once every 15 to 16 month, and how do you say that word? Synodic? Synodic?
I don't know where you're at now.
16th month synodic period. Do you know?
Oh, yeah, synodic. Yeah.
Synodic period. As a result,
synodic.
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 You have to love Billy confidently pretending to know how to pronounce words he's never seen before and failing.
I'm just saying that they look strange. Some things look strange.
We have a lot of strange things on Earth that are natural.
That's true. We sure do. We even have octagons and straight lines on Earth that are natural as well.
That was one of the craziest ones that Terrence brought up, was the octagon on Saturn.
Yeah.
Was it Saturn?
Yeah, Saturn.
Yeah, Saturn.
Saturn.
That when you look at the octagon on Saturn, that it's mimicked in the model that they've created by using
the hexagon that he pretended to recreate in his cartoon on Blender, which is absolutely not simulation software. Yeah, we know you were real impressed by that, Joe.
And how do we overcome what's been embedded into our epigenetic memories? Because we're suffering from epigenetic mental hysteria, which is psychosis, and this war psychosis. We've been programmed as human beings to have consumption and fighting and competition over collaboration.
Billy doesn't know what epigenetics means. Honestly, he doesn't know what genetics means either. He doesn't know what DNA is or how it works, and he absolutely can't substantiate anything he's saying with actual genetic concepts from molecular biology.
That's such an important point, and it needs to be drilled into people's heads.
Yeah.
We're distracting ourselves by getting involved in these stupid arguments over stupid things when there's really important issues with the world.
Yes, Joe, there are really important issues in the world. So instead of making everything worse by platforming an endless string of grifting charlatans who confuse millions of people and make them distrust legitimate experts and authorities in every area of human inquiry, try bringing on guests who actually have any clue what the fuck they're talking about, who can then help the public know what's true. Yeah? Oh, did you have a different idea?
And it's all about money.
It's all about money.
And it's all about money.
It's all about money.
And it's all about money.
It's all about money.
You don't say, fellas.
The more we're able to tap into this information, tap into who we truly are, we'll begin to walk in our power, look inside, go to inner space, not outer space. We'll begin to tap into this, and they discovered now that junk DNA is no longer junk. They're taking the term junk off of it, that it really has function. It always had function. It was never junk. That's just a word to keep us programmed into thinking that we're junk.
Ah, Billy has clearly taken a page out of the Book of Answers in Genesis. Yes, there is junk DNA. Just because we now understand the function of certain non-coding regions of DNA in regulating gene expression, it doesn't mean there isn't junk DNA. This is a distortion that creationists use to pretend that all of our genome has a purpose such that it can't have evolved randomly, and thus there must be a creator. It's false. The overwhelming majority of the genome serves no purpose. About 1 to 2% is protein coding, and about another 18% has some regulatory function, leaving about 80% that is useless. Much less than 99%, of course, but it's still the majority. That there are promoters and enhancers and other things doesn't change the fact that most of the genome serves no purpose. There are even pseudogenes, remnants of old genes that no longer function. Creationist propaganda spotted and dismantled.
So I believe that all of our innate abilities that we used to have are going to start to come back over time, like accessing Earth's magnetic field with the magnetite crystals in our brains. We all have billions of magnetite crystals in our brains, and they put a guy into a laboratory, and they put a giant bar magnet and moved it around the room, and they put an EEG cap on them and a scanner, and they saw that they were orienting themselves to the magnetic field. So we still have the ability to navigate magnetic fields. We just don't even know it. We're unaware of it.
No, we do not have that ability. If we had that ability, then we would have that ability and use it. We wouldn't need compasses. We would be like birds and could sense Earth's magnetic field, a thing we objectively can't do. Right, Joe?
There's so little true understanding of like how birds migrate, like how they all know when to do it, what is calling them, what a very specific direction. Are they using landmarks on the ground? Are they just using some sort of a magnetic field? Are they just tuned in to where the North Pole is? And what are they doing?
Yeah.
How are they doing it?
Incredible.
What is the organ that's allowing them to do it?
Yeah.
Is there so little understanding, or have you never lifted a finger to peruse our thorough understanding? You love to Google the dumb things Billy says. Why don't you Google this? Do you want to learn about cryptochrome 4 and magnetoreception? Why do you only use Google to pretend to substantiate baseless claims from your guests and never to actually learn something, Joe?
So that it too might remain through the ages. So he claims to be the master architect of the structure of the Great Pyramid. And what he did was he incorporated into it advanced science. It's not just a power generator. It's also, in my opinion, it also could be a multifunctional stone computer. Okay? And this thing calculates the orbits of the planets in the inner solar system, which is crazy.
How does it do that?
Matter of fact, well, if I have some, can I open up this to just read some notes?
Yeah,
I got
definitely.
some incredible notes that I did, some math.
Yes, Billy, open up your notes in order for you to completely change the subject from the totally idiotic thing you just said. Stones are somehow a computer that can calculate the orbits of the planets in a time where absolutely nobody knew that heliocentrism was true? Get those notes, Bill.
So one thing, the equatorial circumference of the Earth can be calculated by the Great Pyramid because the Great Pyramid itself is 1 by 43,200 scaled down. So if you take the Great Pyramid and scale it up 43,200 times, it fits directly inside the sphere of the Earth, and it touches the equator. Okay.
So meaning the dimensions of how the angles of it would fit inside of a sphere.
Inside of a sphere. It's a representation of the Earth in a pyramidal format. Okay. That's crazy.
You don't even need to fact-check these numbers to know that what he's saying is stupid. First of all, he can't even pronounce circumference. He was supposed to learn this word in elementary school. Then, the pyramid is a scaled-down version of what? A pyramid is not a sphere. The bigger pyramid fits in the Earth? Okay, that's true of literally any object smaller than the Earth. He wants to scale up the pyramid by the arbitrary number he listed and line up the base with the equator, and that's somehow supposed to represent a sphere? He said it's a representation of the Earth in a pyramidal format? How? Pyramids are not spheres. It's like saying a cat is a representation of a tree in cat format. It doesn't mean anything. Just do the best version of what he thinks he's saying and put the pyramid like this. You're leaving half of the Earth empty, and the other half has absolutely nothing to do with the shape of the pyramid. Who says the tip would even touch the surface? It absolutely wouldn't. Look at the dimensions of the Great Pyramid. Base length of 440 cubits, height of 280 cubits. The diagonal of the base would be the diameter of the Earth at the equator. Cut that in half to get the radius, which should be roughly the height, and it doesn't match. Nothing he is saying means anything. You can take any shape and arbitrarily blow it up to make contact with the surface of a sphere, and there's absolutely nothing special about it.
And if you multiply that by the base perimeter, you get 24,734.94 miles, which is roughly within 170 miles of the circumference of the planet Earth itself.
Circumference.
Just another dumb lie. Again, you don't even need to do math. If the perimeter of the base of the pyramid is contained entirely within the circumference of the Earth, it is nowhere near the circumference of the Earth. This is basic logic. Of course, what he actually said was, if you multiply that by the base perimeter, but never actually stated what that was, so his entire claim was meaningless from the get-go. The only number he gave was the random value of 43,200, and that doesn't work at all. The base perimeter is some fraction of Earth's circumference, so multiplying it by that huge number would give a result that is tens of thousands of times greater than Earth's circumference. And it gets worse.
You can also calculate the speed of the Earth around the sun. So the Great Pyramid, basically you take a pyramid inch times 10 to the 8th power. It equals the speed of Earth around the sun.
Wow, you take a pyramid inch, otherwise known as an inch, and you multiply it by 10 to the 8th power. Okay, that would be 10 to the 8 inches. A couple problems here in pretending this figure equals the speed of the Earth around the sun. First, where did 10 to the 8 come from? Where is that on the pyramid? An inscription somewhere that you're glossing over? Because it sure sounds like you pulled it out of your ass. Second, and much more importantly, this is not a speed. Speed is distance per unit time. Where's the unit of time, dumbass? The guy can't even bother to learn middle school level physics to make his grift sound even remotely credible.
What about taking the fact that the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, is located at the center of land mass on Earth? Not the center of the Earth, the center of land mass.
What? The center of landmass doesn't mean anything. It's not at the center of any landmass. It's just in a place.
So the center point for landmass being you take the surface of the Earth, what percentage of it is covered with water, where the ground is,
Right.
and then you find the center of where the most ground is,
Yes.
and that's where the pyramid is.
Exactly.
Guys, how does anything you're saying describe this location? What is it in the center of? The African continent? Because no, it isn't. It's not at the center of anything.
Taking all the average heights of all the peaks on Earth and then dividing that to get the average height and making that the height of the Great Pyramid.
Getting the average height of all the peaks on Earth and then dividing that to get the height of the pyramid? So you're dividing an average by what? Why would you divide an average by something if the average is what you wanted? And how the hell is the pyramid the average height of all the peaks on Earth? It's not even half as tall as the Eiffel Tower. Mountains are several miles tall. The bullshit he spews is so transparently false, it makes flat earthers' lies about distances look honest in comparison. It's astounding.
Now,
Whoa.
you can't just randomly calculate those numbers, okay?
That's the average height of all the mountains and the peaks on Earth?
That's right.
Wow.
That's right, and that's an absolute fact.
Billy says that's a fact, even though anyone with half a brain knows instantly that it isn't. Pretty convincing.
The Grand Gallery, the latitude of the Grand Gallery inside the Great Pyramid leading into the King's Chamber, the latitude are the exact digits of the speed of light in meters per second.
No, Billy, 29.98 is not the same as 2.998 times 10 to the 8, as remarkable as it is that the first four digits do coincide. Sorry.
Like every single aspect of it is completely insane.
Yeah.
The fact that we still will try to pretend today that it's not impressive or that it was impressive, but that they did it with sand and they did it with how do you know?
Can we please all collectively stop pretending that the pyramids are magic? Yes, they're impressive. There were lots of impressive structures in the ancient world, but in the end, it's a big pile of rocks. Look at it up close. It's just rocks. Egyptologists have a solid grasp on how they were built, with pulleys and ramps, and most importantly, thousands upon thousands of laborers over decades. It's not even close to being a complete mystery. And most importantly, it looks exactly like any other architectural accomplishment of the times, just bigger. It's not a 21st century metal skyscraper. It's not made of some exotic material that we just recently discovered. There is no unfathomably razor-sharp precision or pristine whole number ratio dimensions to the blocks. It's just a bunch of rocks stacked real high. Why does our culture have such an obsession with pretending that ancient buildings can't be explained by anything other than aliens and magic? It's so pathetic, and I will never understand it.
So they're interlocking stones, and there's no way to say just cut this cookie cutter out and we're going to bring them and hoist them in
And
a
all
spot.
of them are perfect.
All of them. And if you accidentally cut the wrong size or you're off by a few inches, you can't make the pyramid. You can spend a week or two getting a stone to a location that don't fit.
All you have to do is take one look at the pyramid up close to see that's absolutely not even remotely true. Granted, there's been some erosion, so the fit was tighter when it was built, but seeing them as they are now really drives the point home that they never had this unthinkable precision he's describing, and very clearly didn't have to, because they don't have it today, and the pyramids are still standing.
Now, what do you think about the other pyramids that are wonky? Like the ones that aren't perfect. Do you think that they were trying to duplicate the Great Pyramid? Do you think they were trying to make their own?
The deeper you go into antiquity, the more perfect construction was. The further you come forward in time, the more wonky and crazy things are and begin to fall apart.
Joe asks a perfectly reasonable question. What about the ones that sucked? And Billy says something immaculately stupid in response. Older stuff is better. The newer a building is, the more it falls apart. There is absolutely no context in which this makes any sense at all. There are thousands of buildings far younger than these pyramids, which are in much better shape, and the younger they are, the better shape they're in. And of course, modern architecture is so reliable that we make buildings that are over 100 stories tall, and yet they can withstand earthquakes. Joe himself completely contradicts this dumb statement just a bit later.
When you go to St. Peter's Basilica, you're just like, what?
I know.
what did you do?
Yeah.
How did you do? How much time did this take?
Yeah.
This is so intricate and so incredible.
I know.
It's one of the most spectacular things I think I've ever seen in my life in terms of like what human beings can do.
So are the ancient pyramids the most incredible thing, or is the Vatican way, way, way more incredible, as you are currently claiming? Zero consistency. But back to the pyramids.
Now, when you hear the carbon dating of the Great Pyramid, what is your take on that? Because the radiocarbon dating is 2,500 BC, right?
Yeah.
That's what they think.
I just don't believe it.
Why is that?
Well, first of all, the way that the structure is made, if you look at other structures made in that same time frame, they don't have the same majesty. They don't have the same level of construction. They don't have the same capability of withstanding time.
Right.
So why are these falling apart, but this one isn't falling apart?
Another reasonable question from Joe. Carbon dating gives a fairly precise age for these structures. Your response, Billy? Oh, he doesn't believe it, and his justification is to completely avoid discussing radiometric dating because he doesn't know what it is or how it works. Great job. Remarkably, Joe pushes back.
And
But that's not necessarily because look, you could have a shitty house today, and you could live right next to Jeff Bezos' house.
That's very true.
You know, I mean, it's just there's going to be different cultures and different abilities and you know different craftsmen.
Yeah, within the same region. I'm talking about within the same area.
Yeah, but even in the same area, you're always going to have people that suck.
If you look at the subterranean shaft.
But of course, Billy just changes the subject, totally unprepared for Joe to push back, since he almost never does, no matter what dumb thing anyone says.
And I think I know why. My hypothesis on those shafts is, well, you look at the way the pyramid is designed, the Queen's Chamber is technology. It seems to be like an electrolysis generating machine to extract hydrogen from water. And Chris Dunn had the same, pretty close to the same hypothesis I had with that. Now, why hydrogen? It's the most abundant element in the universe. And right now, today, we try to communicate with ET on the hydrogen frequency.
Okay, there's a room for doing electrolysis. How? Want to expand on that? No? Okay. They want to get hydrogen. Why? Because it's the most abundant element in the universe. So why do they need water to get it when it's everywhere? We use the hydrogen frequency to communicate. Frequency of what? In general, why does nobody seem to understand what frequency means anymore? Frequency of visible light absorbed or emitted? No, we use radio waves for communication, so this doesn't mean anything.
Now those shafts, imagine on certain alignments, we know for a fact that that pyramid aligns with specific planets or stars. Orion, Aldebaran, Draco, these alignments. And then these shafts would send out this hydrogen frequency, potentially on my hypothesis, around those alignments. Why? For communication purposes.
If they were so advanced, they could build devices to transmit signals in any direction they wanted, instead of huge stone structures that can't move. And again, sending out a hydrogen frequency doesn't mean anything.
But yeah, these stories are everywhere. You know, it's pretty crazy.
It is crazy, and it's just so strange when you see resistance to the idea, while there's still real evidence of this impact.
There is no evidence, Joe. There is literally zero evidence supporting anything this moron has said in the entire 90 minutes you've been talking to him. That's the resistance. That's educated people trying to get through to you and beg you to exercise even the tiniest bit of skepticism when grifting frauds tell you the precise brand of bullshit that you and your millions of viewers love to hear. Honestly, much like with the Terry episode, there's another full hour of this, and it's just not worth listening to. Apart from all the unfounded claims and stonery delusions, Joe just goes on totally unrelated tangents, sometimes making totally valid points about random social issues, but which have nothing to do with the science denial and history denial that is the theme of this episode. To speak to this general theme in summarizing the episode, they both spent the better part of 2 hours doing mental gymnastics to convince themselves that they are reasonable while they reject the entire body of human knowledge in order to lend credence to unfounded conspiracy theories. Here is Joe doing exactly that quite clearly.
Even the James Webb Telescope's discoveries.
Yeah.
You realize that, like, science, like everything else, it's when it's practiced by humans, humans fuck everything up.
Yeah.
They use their ego, they use arrogance, they don't want to be corrected, they want their initial ideas to be correct.
Yeah.
And then there's, you know, a lot of great scientists that are just looking at it and going, this is amazing. Like, let's keep doing this, and let's get an even better telescope out there that maybe could see even further, and maybe we'll have to re-examine what we think about the birth of the universe.
This is the script that science deniers use. All of established science, any scientific concept that is thoroughly corroborated far beyond reasonable doubt. It must be wrong because scientists are stubborn. And anything that challenges established science must be right because they say so, even if these young scientists he's referring to aren't really scientists or scholars at all. They're just unqualified hacks spreading lies on the internet to make a buck. This is the toddler mentality that Joe Rogan champions and infects his viewers with like a deadly plague. It's a mentality that so thoroughly dismantles an individual's ability for skepticism that they end up incapable of hearing how dumb something like this actually sounds.
If you can actually create a phase shift in your atomic frequency to match the atomic frequency of this dimension, you can walk right in. So you can have beings that have already maybe even shed their corporeal bodies and only exist as beings of energetic light. He claims to be able to incarnate whenever he wants and even into other dimensions.
Humankind is simply materialized color operating on the 49th vibration. You would make that conclusion walking down the street or going to the store.
This is what Joe's show has become. The occasional grifter used to be outnumbered by more reasonable guests, or at least just harmless comedians. That time has passed. He almost exclusively interviews total lunatics like Terry or grifting charlatans like Billy, Graham Hancock, and all of these anti-establishment ancient aliens frauds peddling campfire stories to make their millions. At this point, it's a proven business model. That's why these frauds keep popping up, and Joe keeps giving them a voice. If L. Ron Hubbard had been around today trying to start Scientology, Joe 100% without a doubt would have given him the platform to spread his lies and ensnare thousands of additional victims whose lives would be ruined and their families torn apart. This is the damage that Joe's show creates. There is absolutely no difference between Scientology with its stories of Xenu and Thetans and all the bullshit that people like Billy spew. It's the same thing. Whether or not people like Billy or Terry would have it in them or be successful at growing their grift to that magnitude isn't the point. Joe shouldn't be giving them the platform to try it. Because as much as his listeners whine about mainstream media pining for free speech and the glorious alternative, Joe is the mainstream. The volume of the audience he commands makes him mainstream media. That's a fact that Joe himself regularly acknowledges, and he is not living up to the responsibility his position demands. But Joe's integrity aside, the point that remains is this. If you are someone who hears characters like Billy and believes them, you need to work on your ability to apply skepticism. The more outrageous a claim, like 1 × 1 = 2, so all of math is wrong, or stars poop out planets, or aliens made humans and pyramids are magic, the more skeptical you should be, and the more heavily you should scrutinize their claims. Look at what experts in the field say. Google the terms they're using and make sure they're using them properly, or that they're even real words at all. By the same token, do not look at entire areas of human knowledge, like archaeology, astrophysics, or anything else, and just brush them aside with zero comprehension of what you're rejecting. You're insulting millions of brilliant people over many centuries who dedicated their lives to developing the body of knowledge that resulted in all the technology you use every day, and trading them in for any grifter who tells you a story you like. This attitude seems to get more prevalent every year, and it's destroying society. In reality, if one unqualified hack sells you the idea that they're the only ones properly investigating some incredible evidence, you know it's bullshit. Scientists and historians study evidence. It's what they do. They don't just arbitrarily ignore extraordinary evidence for no reason. Maybe one stuffy dude in his 70s will do that, but not an entire field. Every field has thousands of young graduate students desperately searching for a novel approach that will enable them to leave their mark on their field, and breakthroughs happen all the time. If someone or something is being ignored by the entire global scientific community across every sector, it's not because of dogma, it's because it's bullshit. No exceptions. The good news is that if you take even just an hour a week to try and learn basic information in these areas, you will quickly see how the claims of the grifter are not compatible with human knowledge. If you actually possess real knowledge, it's no longer a game of he said, she said. You will actually know things about the physical universe that are interconnected, and that will enable you to identify and reject falsehoods. When Billy or Terry spew some nonsense about DNA that completely violates everything you know about molecules, it's not a matter of who to trust. You don't need to trust anybody because you know how molecules behave, and they don't. You won't fall for fantasies about humans being engineered because you will recognize that our existence is already immaculately explained by paleontological and anthropological evidence. Actual, real, physical, tangible evidence that is studied and agreed upon by thousands of experts all over the world. You will stop falling for the baseless answers to questions that absolutely nobody is asking. You will stop throwing money at grifters like Billy for his useless products and books full of lies. You will stop buying the snake oil. You will snap out of this trance. This is the wish I have for humanity, and I will never relent even one iota in pursuing this reality. So that's it for Billy Carson, yet another charlatan taking the Roganverse by storm. How much worse can it get for this show? Which character will drag me back for more, and when? Hopefully not too soon, but it does seem inevitable. I'll see you next time.